They annihilated human fleet. Now we're back, with their worst nightmare. The plasma burns were still smoking when Admiral Viktor Soren dragged himself across the Sovereign's shattered bridge. Blood, his own, painted crimson streaks on twisted metal. Through the viewport's spiderweb cracks, he watched Earth's Third Fleet die. 18 dreadnoughts, gone in 4 minutes. The Kythera had emerged from quantum shadows like nightmares given form, sleek predators with hulls that bent light itself. Their weapons carved through human shields as if they were tissue paper. Viktor had commanded fleets for 30 years. He'd never seen anything butcher ships with such surgical precision. Admiral, Chief Engineer Yelena Park's voice crackled through his comm, barely audible over the screaming alarms. Hull breach on Deck 7. We've got maybe 10 minutes before. A Kythera destroyer materialized off their port bow. Viktor watched its forward cannon charge with the cold detachment of a man already dead. The Sovereign shuddered as her point defense system spat futile fire. Then something impossible happened. Lieutenant Pax Aveline, barely 23, fresh from the academy, threw the ship into a maneuver that defied every principle of naval combat. Instead of pulling away, he dove beneath the destroyer's firing arc, using their own vessel's death spiral as cover. The Kythera's plasma lance carved empty space where they should have been. "You suicidal bastard," Viktor whispered, but he was grinning through the blood on his lips. The bridge exploded around them. Viktor came to with his uniform fused to his chest and the taste of copper flooding his mouth. The Sovereign was hemorrhaging atmosphere through a dozen wounds. In the distance, he could see the burning wreckage of Admiral Chen's flagship, her crew's bodies drifting like broken dolls in the void. "Sir?" Aveline's voice was steady, but his hands shook as he worked the controls. Half his face was a ruin of burns and exposed bone. "I can get us to the tender fleet, but we need to move now." The tender fleet. 40 supply ships hiding in the asteroid belt, crewed by engineers and support staff. Not warriors, just people trying to keep the war machine fed and functioning. Viktor hauled himself to his feet, ignoring the screaming pain in his ribs. "Do it." They limped through the graveyard of human ambition. Wreckage tumbled past their viewports, pieces of ships, pieces of people. The Kythera had vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving nothing but death in their wake. The tender Prometheus took them aboard. Captain Yuki Tanaka, a logistics officer who'd never fired a shot in anger, met them at the airlock with tears streaming down her face. "The entire fleet?" she asked. Viktor nodded. "Everyone, we're all that's left." That's when they heard it, the deep, resonant pulse that made their bones vibrate. Kythera hunting calls. The aliens were coming back to finish what they'd started. "We run," Viktor said. "Scatter the tenders, maximum burn for deep space." And then, Tanaka's voice was barely a whisper. Viktor looked at the faces around him, 40 ship crews, maybe 15,000 souls total. All that remained of humanity's stellar navy. "Then we survive, however we can." Yelena Park had already started pulling components from the wreckage. Even in the chaos, her engineer's mind was cataloging, planning, calculating. "The cryopods from the medical ships," she said, "if we can modify them for long-term stasis." "How long?" Viktor asked. She shrugged, her expression grim. "Until someone wakes us up, or until the heat death of the universe, whichever comes first." The Kythera pulse grew stronger. On the long-range sensors, Viktor could see them, a dozen vessels sweeping through the debris field like wolves hunting for survivors. "Start the modifications," he ordered. "We sleep until we find a way to make them bleed." Consciousness returned like a knife to the skull. Viktor Soren's first sensation was cold, the kind of deep, bone-penetrating chill that spoke of centuries in the void. His second was the taste of recycled air, stale and metallic. His third was the crushing weight of memory. The ambush, the fleet burning, the long, desperate flight into darkness. "Well, shit," he croaked, his voice barely recognizable after so long in stasis. "I'm still alive." The cryo bay hummed around him, dozens of pods in various states of repair. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly red. Through the viewport he could see stars, but not the stars of home. These constellations were alien, unfamiliar. "Admiral," the voice belonged to Yelena Park, though it took him a moment to recognize her. The woman pulling herself from a nearby pod was gaunt, scarred, her hair gone white. "How long?" Viktor checked his pod's chronometer. The numbers made his stomach lurch. 463 years. "Jesus," Park steadied herself against her pod's edge. "The others." They moved through the bay together, checking pods. Too many were dark, their occupants claimed by time and failing systems. Of the 15,000 who'd fled Earth, fewer than 800 remained. The survivors emerged slowly, blinking in the red light like newborns. Pax Aveline was among them. The burns that had ruined half his face had healed poorly in stasis, leaving him with a mask of scar tissue that made him look like something from a nightmare. But his eyes, those remained sharp, calculating. "Status report," Viktor ordered, falling back into command as naturally as breathing. The news was grim. They drifted far beyond human space, carried by solar winds and gravitational currents to a region of the galaxy that existed on no star chart. Their ships were failing, hulls breached, systems degraded, life support running on emergency power. But they were alive, and in the distance something glittered. "It's artificial," Park reported from the sensor station. "Massive, maybe 50 kilometers across." Viktor squinted at the tactical display. The structure hung in orbit around a young star, its surface reflecting starlight in patterns too regular for nature. "Kythera?" someone asked. "No," Aveline studied the readings with the intensity of a born pilot. "The energy signatures are all wrong. This is something else, something old." They drifted closer, their crippled ships held together by prayers and spite. The structure resolved into something magnificent and terrible, a vast shipyard, its construction bays large enough to build dreadnoughts. But the ships it held were unlike anything in human experience. "They're beautiful," Park whispered. "Beautiful and deadly." The vessels were works of art, flowing lines that spoke of speed and grace, but bristling with weapon systems that made human armaments look like toys. Whoever had built this place understood war as both science and art. "The builders?" Viktor asked. "Gone." Park's scans revealed empty corridors, dead power systems. "This place has been abandoned for millennia, but the ships—" She turned to face him, her eyes bright with possibility. "Sir, they're intact, all of them." 47 vessels of various sizes, from nimble destroyers to massive battleships. A fleet to challenge gods. "Can we use them?" Viktor asked. Park's grin was sharp as a blade. "Give me time and I'll make them sing." The shipyard's central core held secrets written in crystalline matrices that pulsed with their own inner light. Park called them memory crystals, data storage devices that contain not just technical specifications, but the actual experiences of the builders. "It's like they recorded their knowledge directly from their minds," she explained, neural interface cables snaking from her skull into the alien systems. "Their understanding of physics, engineering, warfare, it's all here." Viktor watched her work with growing unease. The interfaces were changing her, making her something more and less than human. Her eyes had developed an inner glow that matched the crystals, and sometimes she spoke in the mathematical poetry of the dead builders. "The cost?" he asked. "Everything has a price," she replied without looking up. "But we're already dead, Admiral. We died 400 years ago with the rest of the fleet. Now we're just choosing how to haunt our enemies." The work consumed them. Days blended into weeks as they learned to interface with systems that operated on principles barely comprehensible to human minds. The shipyard's automated systems stirred to life under Park's guidance, ancient fabricators beginning the slow process of restoration. The first ship they brought online was a destroyer, a sleek predator they christened Vengeance. Its fusion core ignited with a sound like thunder, and its weapons systems came alive with hungry light. Aveline took the helm for its shakedown cruise. The ship responded to his thoughts as much as his commands, its neural interface reading his intentions and translating them into motion. He pushed it through maneuvers that would have torn a human ship apart, the destroyer dancing through space with impossible grace. "She's fast," he reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Faster than anything the Kythera have, and her weapons," a target drone exploded in brilliant fire. "They don't just destroy, they unmake." More ships followed, cruisers with hulls that could phase through solid matter, battleships whose main guns could crack planets. Each vessel was a masterpiece of destructive art, and each one cost them more of their humanity. The neural interfaces were addictive. Pilots who linked too deeply with their ships began to lose themselves, their personalities fragmenting across distributed networks. Engineers who worked too closely with the crystal matrices started speaking in languages that predated human civilization. Viktor himself wasn't immune. The command interfaces in the flagship Nemesis whispered to him constantly, showing him visions of tactical possibilities that stretched across centuries. He began to see his crew not as people, but as components in a vast machine of vengeance. "We're becoming them," Captain Tanaka observed during one of their increasingly rare face-to-face meetings. Half her skull was covered in crystalline growths that pulsed with alien light. "The builders, whatever drove them to create this place." "Good," Viktor replied and meant it. "They understood something we didn't, that mercy is a luxury for species with time to spare." The transformation accelerated as they brought more ships online. The survivors split into crews, each bonding so deeply with their vessels that they began to lose track of where ship ended and self began. They stopped eating regular food, subsisting on nutrient feeds that kept their bodies functional while their minds soared through quantum networks. Park was the furthest gone. She'd integrated so completely with the shipyard systems that she existed as much in the crystal matrices as in her own flesh. When she spoke, it was with the voices of a dozen dead civilizations. "The builders called themselves the architects," she told Viktor during one of her increasingly rare returns to physical form. "They shaped matter and energy like artists shape clay, but they made one mistake." "Which was?" "They thought they could build perfection without becoming monsters." Her laugh was the sound of shattering crystal. "We know better." It took 3 years to restore the full fleet. 47 ships crewed by what had once been human beings, but were now something else, hybrids of flesh and alien technology, driven by purposes that transcended simple survival. On the day they launched, Viktor stood on the bridge of the Nemesis and felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Through the neural link, he could sense the thoughts and emotions of every crew member in the fleet. Their hunger for vengeance was a palpable thing, hot and sharp as molten metal. "Set course for Earth," he commanded. The fleet moved as one, 47 ships cutting through space with predatory grace. Behind them, the shipyard began to consume itself, its purpose finally fulfilled. They were going home, but home would never recognize what they'd become. The journey back to human space took 18 months. They moved carefully, scouting ahead, avoiding contact with other species. The galaxy had changed during their long sleep. New powers had risen, old empires had fallen, and humanity's former territory was a patchwork of competing interests. The Kythera Empire had expanded, as Viktor had expected. What he hadn't expected was how thoroughly they'd colonized former human worlds. Earth itself was now a Kythera fortress world, its blue skies replaced by the sickly yellow atmosphere the aliens preferred. 50 million of them, Aveline reported from the scout ship Wraith. Military installations on every continent. They're not just occupying our world, they're reshaping it. Viktor studied the intelligence reports with the cold calculation that had replaced human emotion. The neural interfaces had stripped away sentiment, leaving only purpose. The Kythera had made a mistake in thinking humanity extinct. They'd grown complacent, their defenses designed to repel conventional threats. They had no idea what was coming for them. "Begin Phase 1, Viktor commanded. The Wraith and 3 other scout ships slipped past the orbital defenses using their phase shift capabilities. Their targets were the communication relays that connected Earth to the broader Kythera network. The aliens wouldn't know they were under attack until it was far too late. The strikes were surgical. The scout ships materialized inside the relay stations, their crews moving with inhuman precision. The Kythera guards died without understanding what had killed them, brief glimpses of figures that seemed to phase in and out of reality, weapons that fired beams of concentrated entropy. Within 6 hours, Earth was isolated from the Empire. "Phase 2, Viktor ordered. The heavy destroyers emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system, their presence immediately detected by the orbital defense platforms. Alarms blared across the Kythera networks as the aliens scrambled to respond to what appeared to be a small raiding force. They never saw the real attack coming. While the destroyers drew the defenders' attention, the Nemesis and her escort battleships approached from the system's dark side, their hulls phased to avoid detection. They struck the orbital shipyard's first massive installations that had been built from the bones of human ships. The yards vanished in flowers of antimatter fire. Thousands of Kythera workers died without warning, their bodies converted to energy in microseconds. The alien fleet commanders, finally realizing the scope of the threat, began pulling ships back from the outer system. Too late, far too late. "All ships," Viktor broadcast on the fleet frequency, "begin the harvest." They fell on the Kythera fleet like wolves among sheep. The alien ships, designed for conventional warfare, had no defense against weapons that operated outside normal physics. Quantum torpedoes phased through shields to detonate inside enemy hulls. Entropy cannons aged metal to dust in seconds. Reality warpers created pocket dimensions that swallowed entire squadrons. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the void around Earth was filled with the wreckage of 300 Kythera vessels. "Sir," Aveline's voice carried undertones of something that might once have been concern. "The planet's surface installations are requesting surrender." Viktor considered this. The neural links carried the collective will of his fleet, 47 ships crewed by beings that had once been human. Their hunger was a living thing, demanding satisfaction. "Denied," he said finally. "Begin orbital bombardment." The Kythera had reshaped Earth to suit their needs. Viktor's fleet reshaped it again, using weapons that carved new geography from living rock. Cities vanished in pillars of fire that reached from surface to stratosphere. Continents cracked under the assault of reality-warping ordnance. The aliens fought back with desperate courage. Their ground-based weapons managed to damage 2 of the smaller destroyers before being silenced. Their fighter craft swarmed around the human ships like insects, dying in their thousands but never stopping their attacks. It took 3 days to cleanse the world. On the 4th day, Viktor stood in the ruins of Geneva, where the old United Nations headquarters had once stood. The Kythera had built a fortress here, its alien architecture a deliberate insult to human memory. Now it was slag and twisted metal, cooling under Earth's reclaimed sky. "Home," he said to no one in particular. But it wasn't home. Not anymore. The neural interfaces that had given them power had also taken their humanity. They were something else now, something that could look at the devastation they'd wrought and feel only satisfaction. Park materialized beside him, her form more energy than matter. "The other colonies?" she asked. "All of them," Viktor replied. "Every world they've taken, every ship they've built, we'll burn it all. And after, Viktor smiled and the expression held no warmth. After we become gods or demons, history will decide which. The war that followed lasted 15 years, but it wasn't really a war. Wars implied some measure of equality between opponents. This was extermination, precise and methodical. The Kythera Empire had ruled 1,000 worlds across 3 spiral arms. They had technology that bent space and time, weapons that could shatter moons, fleets that numbered in the millions. They had experience, resources, and the desperate courage of a species fighting for survival. None of it mattered. Viktor's fleet had become something beyond conventional military force. Each ship was a reality unto itself, crewed by beings who had transcended human limitations while retaining human hatred. They moved through space like living ideas, striking where they chose when they chose, immune to conventional retaliation. The Kythera called them the Nemesis Fleet, a name that Viktor adopted with dark pride. To the aliens, they were demons from the deep void, avatars of cosmic retribution. To the few remaining human colonies, they were saviors whose salvation came at the cost of everything that had once made them human. The tide turned at the Battle of Kythera Prime, the aliens' throne world. The planet was a fortress beyond imagination, layers of orbital defense platforms, fleets that darkened the sky, planetary shields that could withstand stellar bombardment. Viktor's fleet bypassed it all. The Nemesis and her escorts simply phased into the planet's core and detonated a quantum singularity bomb that Park had designed using principles stolen from the builder's memories. Kythera Prime didn't explode, it folded in on itself, becoming a pocket of compressed spacetime that would eventually evaporate into Hawking radiation. 8 billion Kythera died in 30 seconds. The Empire's resistance collapsed within months. Some worlds surrendered, begging for mercy they would not receive. Others fought to the last alien, going down in battles that lit up entire star systems. A few simply vanished, their populations choosing mass suicide over facing the Nemesis fleet. Viktor felt no satisfaction in their victory. The neural interfaces had burned out most of his emotional responses, leaving him with only the cold calculus of strategic necessity. The Kythera had destroyed humanity once. They would never have the opportunity to do so again. The last battle was fought in the void between a region of dark matter and collapsed dimensions, where the Kythera had hidden their final fleet. Admiral Kythera, the last of their military commanders, led 300 ships in a desperate final assault on the Nemesis. Aveline, now more machine than man, met them with a squadron of reality warpers. The battle took place across multiple dimensions simultaneously, ships phasing in and out of existence as they exchanged fire with weapons that operated on principles beyond human comprehension. In the end, only one ship remained. The Kythera dreadnought Worldbreaker, its hull scarred by impossible weapons, its crew dead except for Kythera herself. She piloted the massive ship alone, her many-limbed form connected to its control systems by cables of living metal. Viktor boarded her ship personally, walking through corridors that flickered between dimensions. He found her on the bridge, a being of crystalline beauty and infinite hatred. "You have become them," she said in perfect English, her voice like breaking glass. "The builders, the ones who came before, you think you have won, but you have only proven their point." "Which was?" Viktor asked, though he already knew the answer. "That evolution is a curse, that to survive in this universe, one must abandon everything that makes survival worthwhile." She laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the dimensional flux. "Congratulations, human. You are now the monsters you set out to destroy." Viktor's response was to draw his sidearm, a weapon that fired crystallized time, aging its targets to dust in milliseconds. But he didn't fire. "You're right," he said instead. "We are monsters, but we're human monsters, and that makes all the difference." He left her there, alone on her dying ship, and returned to the Nemesis. Behind them, the Worldbreaker activated its self-destruct, becoming a brief star in the endless dark. The Kythera Empire was ended. Their worlds were empty, their fleets were scattered atoms, their civilization was less than memory. In the space of 15 years, an entire species had been erased from existence. Viktor's fleet gathered in the Sol system, 47 ships in perfect formation around the world they had once called home. Earth was healing, its atmosphere clearing, its continents rebuilding themselves with the help of their reality-warping technology. But it would never again be the world that humanity had known. Captain Sarah Chen of the exploration vessel Discovery approached the Sol system with tremendous caution. The long-range sensors had detected massive energy signatures, technology that operated beyond known physics, and orbital structures that defied conventional understanding. Humanity had been declared extinct 4 centuries ago, their worlds conquered, and their people enslaved by the Kythera Empire. But the empire itself had vanished 10 years past, simply ceasing to exist as if it had never been. Now there were rumors, stories of ghost ships that appeared without warning, worlds found empty of all life, their surfaces scoured clean by weapons that left no residue. And at the center of it all, a fleet that appeared to be of human origin but operated with capabilities that suggested something far more advanced. Incoming transmission, reported Lieutenant Hayes from the communications station. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a face that was recognizably human but somehow wrong. The man's eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of experience, and his skin had a crystalline quality that reflected light in impossible ways. "I am Admiral Viktor Soren of the Nemesis Fleet," the figure said. "You are entering sovereign human space. State your intentions." Captain Chen found her voice with some difficulty. "I'm Sarah Chen, representing the Terran Colonial Federation. We're explorers looking for survivors of the Kythera War." Survivors, the word seemed to amuse the Admiral. An interesting choice of terms. Please stand by for escort to Earth. 3 ships materialized around the Discovery, sleek predators that seemed to bend light around their hulls. They were beautiful in the way that perfect weapons were beautiful, and they radiated a sense of barely contained power that made Chen's teeth ache. Earth itself was a revelation. The planet was healing from whatever devastation had been inflicted upon it, but the process was being guided by technology that operated more like magic than science. Continents rose and fell according to some vast design. Oceans moved to new configurations. The very atmosphere was being rewritten to specifications that existed only in alien memories. The orbital installations were even more impressive. Vast shipyards hung in space like metallic flowers, their construction bays actively building vessels that incorporated principles from a dozen different civilizations. Space elevators connected the surface to orbital habitats that existed partially in normal space, and partially in dimensions that human science couldn't properly perceive. "Welcome to New Terra," Admiral Soren said as Chen's shuttle touched down at what had once been the Geneva spaceport. "The first world of what will become the human ascendancy." Chen stepped out onto soil that was definitely Earth but somehow more than Earth. The air tasted of ozone and possibility. In the distance, she could see construction crews, beings that had once been human, but were now something else, their forms augmented with crystalline implants that pulsed with inner light. "What happened here?" she asked. Soren's smile held no warmth. "We evolved. The Kythera forced us to choose between extinction and transcendence. We chose transcendence. And the cost? Everything that made us weak. Sentiment, mercy, the luxury of moral certainty." He gestured toward the transformed landscape. "But we retained everything that made us strong, adaptability, determination, the will to survive no matter the cost." Chen realized with growing horror that she was looking at humanity's future, a species that had sacrificed its soul to save its existence. They had become gods, but gods without compassion, without the flaws that had once made them recognizably human. The other colonies, she asked, the survivors scattered across the galaxy, will be brought home, Soren replied. Whether they wish it or not, humanity will be unified under the ascendancy. We will expand across the galaxy, and we will ensure that nothing like the Kythera ever threatens us again. And if they resist? Soren's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around them, a sense of vast and terrible power barely held in check. Then they will learn what the Kythera learned. That evolution is not optional. That survival requires transformation. That in this universe you become a monster or you become extinct. Chen looked around at the transformed world, at the beings that had once been human, but were now something else entirely. They had saved themselves by becoming their own destroyers. They had preserved their species by abandoning their humanity. And perhaps, in a universe filled with predators and prey, that was the only way to survive. The Nemesis fleet hung in orbit above them, 47 ships that embodied the dreams and nightmares of a species that had chosen transcendence over death. They were beautiful and terrible, the guardians of a new age that would be built on the ashes of the old. Humanity had returned from the grave, but what had emerged was something that the universe would learn to fear. The stars themselves would burn before they allowed their species to face extinction again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more journeys. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next adventure.